The oath itself was quiet, formal, exactly the way it's supposed to be. We stood shoulder to shoulder in neat rows, boots aligned on the polished gym floor, hands raised, eyes forward. The American flag hung behind the officer, its edges barely moving in the air-conditioned stillness. When he spoke, his voice was steady, practiced, carrying the weight of something older than any of us in the room. "I do solemnly swear." I repeated the words without hesitation. Each one landed firmly in my chest, like a promise I was finally making out loud. Not to my parents, not to the people sitting in the folding chairs behind us. To myself. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. No speeches, no family remarks. Just the oath, the dismissal, and the quiet understanding that something irreversible had just happened. Applause followed. Chairs scraped back. Phones came out. Families were invited to move closer for photos. The formality softened, but the respect remained. People smiled. Some cried. A few hugged their recruits tightly, like they were trying to memorize the feel of them before distance set in. That's when my parents approached. My father looked pleased the way he always did when things went according to plan. My mother stayed half a step behind him, her face composed, unreadable. My sister Claire was already recording, angling her phone for what she probably thought would be a proud family moment. "Let's get a picture," my father said loud enough to be heard. "Everyone's still here." Someone, maybe an organizer, maybe just a well-meaning volunteer, handed him a microphone that had been set up for the post-ceremony announcements. It wasn't official anymore. The officer had stepped aside. The oath was over. This was the in-between space. Informal, unscripted. The dangerous part. My father tapped the mic once, smiling like he was about to say something charming. "I just want to say a few words," he began, "since everyone's here." A few people turned. Phones stayed up. No one stopped him. Why would they parents say proud things at moments like this all the time? "I guess we should start with honesty," he said, chuckling lightly. "It's been a long day, and I think it's time to tell the truth." That familiar tightening started in my stomach. "We didn't adopt her because we wanted another child," he continued. "We adopted her because it made sense financially. The tax breaks helped. That's just the reality." The words didn't crash, they slid. A few confused laughs rippled through the crowd, the kind people give when they think they've misunderstood the tone. My sister smiled just slightly, as if she'd been let in on a private joke. My mother stared straight ahead, lips pressed together, saying nothing. "And let's be clear," my father added, waving the microphone loosely. "She was never really part of the family. So this isn't some emotional story, it's just facts." Silence followed. Not ceremonial silence. The other kind. The kind where people realize they've wandered into something they weren't meant to see. I stood there in uniform, surrounded by strangers, feeling every phone in the room still pointed forward. I didn't cry. I didn't move at first. I let the moment settle, let his words hang where they couldn't be pulled back, because this time they weren't whispered in a kitchen or disguised as jokes at a dinner table. They were public, recorded, witnessed. I stepped forward. The microphone was still warm when I took it from his hand. My father looked surprised, like this part hadn't been rehearsed, like he expected me to shrink the way I always had. I didn't. "My father is right about one thing," I said calmly. "I am adopted." The room exhaled, relieved. This was familiar ground. "But what he didn't mention," I continued, "is that adoption doesn't give anyone ownership, and it doesn't give anyone the right to erase someone in public." My sister's smile faltered. "This ceremony," I said, gesturing slightly toward the flag, "was about commitment, about service, about choosing responsibility." I looked directly at the phone still recording. "I didn't join the military to belong to this family," I said. "I joined because I already knew what it felt like to survive without protection." The silence deepened. "And since we're sharing truths," I added evenly, "it's important to know that any access or authority my parents assumed over my life ended a while ago. Formally, legally." My mother finally looked at me. My father went pale. "I won't explain details here," I said. "But I will say this, my future, my records, and my benefits belong to me. Not to anyone who confuses control with care." I handed the microphone back, not to my father, but to the event coordinator, and stepped away. Behind me, no one spoke. As I walked toward the exit, still in uniform, I felt it clearly for the first time the moment control slipped out of their hands. The oath was already done. The truth had followed. And this time I didn't stay quiet to make it easier for anyone else. I didn't always know I was adopted. Not the way adults think kids know things with facts and paperwork and explanations that make sense. I knew in the way children know when something is off long before they have words for it. In our house, love had rules. They weren't written down, but they were enforced with the same precision my father later claimed he admired about the military. I learned them early. Rule 1, don't ask too many questions. Rule 2, don't compare yourself to your sister. Rule 3, gratitude should be louder than pain. My sister Claire was everything our parents liked to point to. Straight A report cards taped to the fridge, piano recitals with printed programs, photos framed and rehung whenever a guest came over just in case they needed reminding. She was biological, which wasn't something anyone said out loud at first. It didn't need to be said. It lived in the way my mother brushed Claire's hair absent-mindedly while talking like it was muscle memory. It lived in the way my father corrected my posture but praised Claire's confidence. I was the quiet one, the helpful one, the one who learned to read rooms instead of books. I found out I was adopted when I was 9 on a Tuesday that smelled like burnt toast and floor cleaner. My parents didn't sit me down. There wasn't a conversation. There was a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, opened carelessly, and one envelope had slipped out of the pile. My name was on it, typed in all caps, along with words I didn't recognize yet, but felt heavy all the same. Finalized adoption. I asked my mother what it meant. She froze just long enough to be noticeable, then smiled like she was correcting a misunderstanding. "It means we chose you," she said. That sounded nice. It even felt nice for about 5 minutes, long enough for me to believe it. My father added, "And you should remember that. Not everyone gets that kind of chance." That was the first time gratitude was used as leverage. After that, things made more sense in a quiet, uncomfortable way. Why my sister had baby pictures on every shelf, and I had exactly 2 photos from before the adoption, both blurry, both tucked into an album no one opened. Why family jokes always seemed to land on me, why my mistakes were lessons and Claire's were phases. When relatives visited, my parents introduced me with qualifiers. "This is our adopted daughter. She's different. She had a rough start." They said it like they were explaining a scar. At school, when teachers praised me, my father smiled tightly and said things like, "Well, we do our best." When I struggled, he sighed and reminded me where I came from, as if my past were a debt I still hadn't finished paying. Claire learned quickly how to play her role. She didn't need to be cruel. The system already worked in her favor. Sometimes she was nice to me, especially when friends were over. Sometimes she wasn't, but she always knew where she stood. I learned where I stood too. I was the one who set the table, the one who stayed quiet when adults talked, the one who apologized first, even when I didn't know what I'd done wrong. There were moments, small, almost invisible ones, where I thought things might change. A good grade, a compliment from a neighbor, a coach who told my parents I had potential. Each time I waited for pride to appear on their faces the way it did for Claire. It never did. Instead, my father would say, "Don't get ahead of yourself." My mother would say, "You should be thankful you're doing okay." Okay became the ceiling. By the time I was a teenager, I understood the unspoken contract. I could stay in this family as long as I didn't need too much, as long as I didn't take up space that wasn't already assigned to me, as long as I remembered that belonging was conditional. When I asked about college, my parents said we'd see what made sense. When Claire talked about her future, it was already mapped out, spoken about in present tense. When I talked about mine, it was hypothetical, optional. The first time my father mentioned money in relation to me was the first time I heard the word expense attached to my name. He didn't say it directly. He said it to my mother loud enough for me to hear, like an accounting note. "Adoptions aren't cheap," he said. "We've already done our part." I didn't argue. I nodded. I learned. So when the idea of the military entered my head years later, it didn't come from rebellion. It came from clarity. The military didn't promise unconditional love. It promised structure, rules, clear lines. You do this, you earn that. You fail, you try again. No pretending, no hidden scoreboards. I didn't tell my parents right away. I researched quietly, read at night, memorized acronyms and requirements like they were a secret language I was finally allowed to learn. For the first time, the path in front of me didn't depend on anyone's approval. When I did tell them, my father laughed, not unkindly, not cruelly, just dismissive. "You," he said, "why?" That question followed me all the way to the gym on enlistment day. It echoed in the silence after his joke landed, and everyone waited to see how I'd react. Standing there in uniform, I realized something that would have broken me years earlier. He wasn't wrong about one thing. They never intended for me to stay. They just didn't expect me to leave with my spine intact. And that microphone wasn't the first place my father erased me. It was just the first time he did it in front of witnesses. People like to believe that joining the military is an act of defiance, that it's a door you slam on your way out of a bad house. For me, it wasn't rebellion, it was recognition. I was 17 the first time the idea took shape, not as a plan, but as a sentence. I couldn't stop repeating in my head. Here the rules are written down. No guessing, no reading faces, no pretending that love would show up later if I stayed small enough. I noticed it during a school assembly when a recruiter spoke. He didn't sell glory, he didn't promise heroism. He talked about structure, responsibility, and earning your place. He talked about standards that didn't change depending on who your parents were. I felt something click in my chest, quiet and precise, like a lock finding its key. At home, rules were fluid. Praise was unpredictable. Silence was safer than honesty. In the military, rules were rules. I started training early, running before dawn, push-ups in my room with the door locked. I hid my blisters under socks and my exhaustion under the same practiced calm I'd worn my whole life. When my father noticed the change, he assumed it was a phase. "You'll get tired," he said once, not unkindly. "You always do." That sentence was meant to shrink me back into my place. It didn't. When I finally told them I'd spoken to a recruiter, the reaction wasn't anger, it was amusement. My sister smirked over her cereal. "You won't last," she said lightly. "It's not like this is summer camp." My mother paused mid-dish, then went back to scrubbing as if the conversation had already ended. My father leaned back in his chair. "If you're doing this to prove something, he said you don't need to. We already know who you are." That was the moment I understood something important. They weren't afraid I'd fail, they were afraid I'd succeed without them. After that, they treated my enlistment like a curiosity, something to mention to neighbors. Something to frame as our adopted daughter serving her country said, with the same tone you'd use for a hobby that was slightly embarrassing but useful for conversation. They asked questions, but only the kind that benefited them. "What benefits do you get? Does that cover healthcare? Are there tax things we should know about?" My father suddenly had opinions about paperwork. My mother wanted copies of forms just in case. I handed over what I thought was required. I didn't know yet how carefully they'd learned to blur the line between support and control. When I left for training, there were hugs, awkward, brief. My sister waved like she was seeing me off to college, already confident I'd be back before long. My father said, "Don't embarrass us." I didn't respond. Training was harder than anything I'd done before and somehow easier. My body ached in honest ways. My mind was exhausted in ways that made sense. When I failed, I was told why. When I succeeded, it was noted, not exaggerated, not withheld. For the first time, effort equaled outcome. I wrote home at first, short letters, updates. I told them when I passed benchmarks, when I was proud of myself. The replies were polite, delayed, careful. Claire wrote once, "Dad says this will look good on applications." Applications for what she didn't say? As the months went on, the letters slowed. The phone calls became more transactional. My parents asked about pay schedules, about allowances, about whether my address had changed. They asked if I could help out with certain bills now that I was earning steady money. I sent what I could, because gratitude still had a voice in my head. By the time I was officially sworn in, they had my service number written down somewhere. They had my benefits paperwork filed in a folder I'd never seen. They spoke about my service like it was a shared investment. I didn't notice how much access they had until I started asking questions. Why was mail going to their house? Why had my emergency contact been updated without my signature? Why did my father know details I hadn't shared? When I asked, my mother said, "We're just helping." My father said, "You're young. This stuff is complicated." The uniform changed how strangers looked at me. It didn't change how my family did. So when the ceremony came and I stood there in formation with my future settling into place, I already knew the truth they thought they were revealing. I'd never been part of the family in the way they meant. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see from the front row with their phones held high, was that I'd stopped measuring my worth by their definition a long time ago. That ceremony wasn't just a beginning. It was the first time my life belonged entirely to me. And when my father chose that moment to strip me of the last illusion of belonging, he did me a favor he'll never understand. Because by the time I took that microphone, I wasn't standing there as their daughter anymore. I was standing there as someone who finally knew where her loyalty began and where it ended. The first person who treated my questions like they mattered wasn't a parent. It wasn't a sibling. It wasn't anyone who had ever told me I should be grateful for being allowed to exist. It was a woman in a plain office with a government seal on the wall and a stack of binders behind her desk. She introduced herself with her last name only, and didn't ask me to explain my childhood before she asked me what I needed. "What do you want to understand?" she said. "Not what's wrong, not why are you upset. Just what do you want to understand?" I told her I was adopted. I told her my parents handled most of my paperwork. I told her I felt like things were happening in my name that I hadn't agreed to. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make sympathetic noises. She took notes. Then she said something that shifted the air in the room. "Let's separate feelings from authority," she said calmly. "They're not the same thing." That sentence followed me for weeks. She walked me through documents I had signed without fully reading back when I still believed that help only came from people who claimed you. She explained what access meant, what consent meant, what revocable meant. She showed me where my signature was missing and where it had been assumed. None of it was dramatic. That was the strangest part. There was no villain monologue, no smoking gun, just a slow accumulation of overreach dressed up as care. Forms rerouted, addresses redirected, benefits discussed by people who weren't beneficiaries. "They shouldn't have this," she said at one point, tapping a page, "and they definitely shouldn't be speaking on your behalf." I asked what that meant. She met my eyes. "It means you get to decide when this stops." I didn't act right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd spent my whole life reacting. I wanted this to be different. I wanted to be sure. So I watched. I watched how often my father referenced my service when it suited him. I watched how my mother avoided eye contact when money came up. I watched how my sister joked about our military benefits like it was a shared achievement. And quietly, carefully, I started to prepare. I updated my emergency contacts. I redirected my mail. I changed access permissions line by line, learning the language of boundaries the way I'd once learned the language of gratitude. Each change felt small. Each one felt enormous. No one noticed at first. That told me everything I needed to know about how invisible my autonomy had been. The day my father finally asked, "Did you change something?" his tone wasn't curious. It was irritated. "I updated my information," I said. He frowned. "Why?" "Because I can. Because it's mine. Because you don't get to decide anymore." I didn't say any of that. I just said it was time. That was when the pressure started. Phone calls framed as concern. Messages framed as confusion. A sudden urgency to talk things through as a family. I listened without agreeing. I responded without explaining. I learned that silence could be a boundary, not a weakness. Still, I didn't confront them, not yet. Because there was one thing I hadn't planned on. The ceremony. When the date came through, my parents were suddenly involved again. My father insisted on attending. My mother asked about seating. My sister talked about outfits. It felt like they were stepping back into roles they'd never fully left, rehearsing lines they'd said 100 times before. I considered asking them not to come. I considered protecting myself preemptively. In the end, I didn't. Part of me wanted to see what they'd do with an audience. Part of me wanted the truth to stop hiding behind closed doors. I didn't expect my father to choose the microphone. I didn't expect him to be that careless. But in hindsight, it made sense. He'd always believed the story belonged to him, that he could frame it however he liked, and I'd stand there and take it. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already stopped asking for permission to exist. So when he spoke and the room froze and my past was reduced to a financial footnote in front of strangers, I didn't feel panic. I felt confirmation. Because everything I had quietly prepared for came down to that moment, public words, recorded truth, witnesses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply stepped into the space he had cleared for me without realizing it. Later, when people asked if I'd planned what I said, I told them the truth. I hadn't planned to be humiliated, but I had planned to be ready. And there's a difference. By the time I reached the side of the gym, the ceremony had fully dissolved into its softer aftermath. Chairs were half folded. People clustered in small groups, smiling, talking, laughing a little too loudly the way people do when emotion hasn't finished settling yet. The officer who had administered the oath was already speaking quietly with an organizer, his role complete. Official business done. That mattered. Because everything that followed happened after the oath, after the formality, after the line had already been crossed. My father hadn't followed me immediately. He stayed near the front, surrounded by people who didn't quite know what to say to him anymore. I could see it in their posture, the slight lean back, the polite distance. The room had shifted. He felt it too. That's why he came after me. He caught up just as I reached the hallway where the noise thinned and the echo of footsteps replaced applause. His steps were quick, uneven. My mother trailed behind him, her hands clasped together like she was trying to hold herself in place. Claire stayed back, watching, calculating. What was that my father demanded, his voice low but sharp, not a question, an accusation? I turned slowly. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't hurry. I'd learned that control hates calm more than anger. That I said was me responding to what you said. You embarrassed us, he snapped, in front of everyone. I almost laughed, almost. You did that yourself, I replied. I just didn't clean it up for you this time. My mother finally spoke. Please, she said quietly. This isn't the place. I looked past her back toward the gym where phones were still out, where people were replaying what they'd just witnessed in their heads. You're right, I said. This isn't the place. That's why I didn't start it. My father took a step closer, lowering his voice even more. You think you're being strong, he said, but you don't understand what you've done. People talk. Records exist. Yes, I said, they do. That stopped him. For the first time since I'd known him, my father hesitated, not because he was choosing his words carefully, but because he realized I wasn't guessing anymore. What records, he asked. I didn't answer right away, not to be dramatic, to be precise. The kind that don't belong to you, I said finally, the kind that never did. My mother's breath caught, just barely. This was supposed to be a proud day, she said, for all of us. It was, I replied, until you decided to rewrite it. She flinched at that. She always did when responsibility was named directly. Behind us, a few people drifted closer, pretending to look for the restrooms, pretending not to listen. The hallway wasn't private anymore. It didn't need to be. My father straightened his shoulders, reaching for authority the way he always had. You don't get to do this, he said. You don't get to shut us out. We're your parents. I met his eyes fully then. No, I said. You were my legal guardians. That's not the same thing. The words landed hard. You don't get to claim access to my life just because you're uncomfortable without it, I continued. And you don't get to weaponize my adoption when it suits you. Claire finally spoke from behind him, her voice light-forced. You're taking this too seriously. I turned to her. You smiled, I said. That was serious enough. Her face flushed. She looked away. My father tried one last time, his voice rising now, frustration breaking through the polish. You think this ends here? I nodded, yes. That certainty shook him more than anything else I'd said. I didn't come here to argue, I added. I came here to serve, and I've already said everything I needed to say. I took a step back, creating space that hadn't existed between us before. If you have questions, I continued evenly, you can direct them through the appropriate channels, the same ones everyone else has to use. My mother's voice trembled. You wouldn't. I held her gaze. I already did. Silence fell between us, heavy and undeniable. For a moment I saw it clearly, the version of them that had always believed my role was to absorb discomfort so they wouldn't have to. That version was scrambling now, looking for leverage that no longer existed. I didn't wait for them to find it. I turned and walked away back toward the exit where sunlight cut through the glass doors, and the sound of my own footsteps grounded me. Behind me, my father called my name once, not angrily, not kindly, just urgently. I didn't turn around. Because the truth is this, The confrontation didn't happen on a stage. It didn't interrupt a military ritual. It happened after, in the space where people usually relax and say things they think won't matter. That's where he chose to reveal himself. And that's where I chose not to protect him from it. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter. The weight I'd carried into that building didn't follow me out. The oath was already sworn. My duty was already clear. Everything else, the accusations, the fear, the loss of control, belonged to them now. And for the first time, I didn't take it with me. The first call came before I reached my car. I recognized my father's number immediately. I let it ring. Not because I was afraid of what he'd say, but because I knew exactly how he would say it. Calm, first, measured, as if we were discussing logistics. His voice always softened when he thought he could still steer the outcome. The voicemail arrived a minute later. "Listen," he said, controlled, clipped. "We need to talk. You misunderstood what I said back there. Call me." Misunderstood. That word has a long history in my family. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone was vibrating again. This time it was my mother. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could already hear the tremor she would try to disguise as concern. I drove back to my barracks with the windows down, the late afternoon air cutting across my face. I expected to feel shaken. I expected adrenaline or regret or the delayed crash that comes after you do something irreversible. Instead, I felt clear. That night, the messages came in waves. My sister texted first. "You didn't have to humiliate them." Then a minute later, "This makes you look ungrateful." I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then set the phone face down. Gratitude again. The old leash dragged out as if it still fit. The next morning, my father escalated. He called my unit. Not directly, he didn't have that access anymore, but he left a message with an administrative office identifying himself as my parent, his voice thick with urgency. He said there had been a family emergency. He asked for me by name, rank omitted, title omitted, as if that too were optional. The message was forwarded to my superior. I was called in not because I was in trouble, but because protocol demands transparency. I explained calmly. I didn't overshare. I didn't defend myself. I said there was no emergency, that my parents no longer had authority to speak on my behalf, and that any future contact should be documented. The officer nodded once. "Understood," he said. "We'll handle it." Handle it. Another phrase that sounded simple and carried weight. My father did not appreciate losing a channel. By noon, he had tried again, this time through email, long, rambling, full of accusations disguised as concern. "You're being manipulated. You don't understand how the real world works. You owe us a conversation." I forwarded it to the same woman who had helped me untangle my paperwork weeks earlier. She replied with one sentence. "Do not engage. Let this be procedural." Procedural, that was the difference between us now. My mother tried next. Her voicemail was softer, almost pleading. "We're worried about you," she said. "This isn't like you. You've always been reasonable." Reasonable, another word that used to mean silent. I deleted it. That afternoon, something shifted. I could feel it in the pattern of their attempts. The calm had cracked. The entitlement was showing through the edges. They weren't asking anymore. They were scrambling. By the end of the week, they tried a different angle. My sister showed up. She didn't come to the base. She wasn't that reckless. She waited outside the perimeter, texting me photos of the entrance like landmarks, as if nostalgia could pull me back into orbit. "We need to talk in person," she wrote. "Dad's not taking this well." I didn't respond. She called my mother, who called my father, who called everyone they still thought might listen. Aunts, uncles, old family friends. Anyone who might reframe this as a misunderstanding instead of what it was, a boundary enforced too late for their comfort. I heard about it secondhand. People reached out with careful messages. "We're sure they didn't mean it that way. Family says things they regret. You only get one set of parents." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I learned that defending yourself to people who want harmony more than justice is a losing game. The real turning point came quietly. A certified letter arrived at my parents' house. I know because my sister texted me a photo, uninvited, like she was delivering gossip she couldn't contain. The envelope was official, government seal, clear language, no room for interpretation. Notice of revoked access. Notice of unauthorized representation. Notice of cease and desist regarding military correspondence. 3 pages, clean, precise. My father called me that night. I answered. He didn't bother with calm this time. What did you do? He demanded. Do you have any idea what this is doing to us? I waited until he finished. I followed procedure, I said. You're punishing us, he snapped, after everything we did for you. There it was, the ledger. No, I said, I'm correcting what was never yours. My mother's voice broke through in the background. Tell her to stop, she said. Tell her we're her family. I closed my eyes just for a moment. You don't get to use that word like a weapon, I said quietly. He laughed, sharp and humorless. You think this is over? I thought about the gym, the microphone, the witnesses. Yes, I said, it is. He hung up on me. 2 days later, my unit received confirmation that my parents had attempted to access information they were no longer authorized to receive. The attempt was denied, logged, filed. Control doesn't disappear all at once, it flails first. My parents didn't lose everything that week. Real life isn't that neat. But they lost the thing they valued most, the ability to define me without my consent. They lost the privilege of proximity. And I learned something important watching it happen. People who benefit from your silence will call your boundaries cruelty. People who rely on your compliance will call your independence betrayal. I didn't argue with any of it. I just kept going to work, kept training, kept living in a system where rules applied evenly and words meant what they said. And slowly, unmistakably, the noise from my old life faded into the background where it belonged. Time doesn't heal everything. That's one of the lies people like to offer when they don't know what else to say. What time does what it's very good at is revealing what's real once the noise dies down. The weeks after everything settled were strangely quiet. Not peaceful at first, just quiet in the way a room feels after furniture has been dragged out, leaving marks on the floor where things used to be. I kept expecting another call, another message, another attempt to pull me back into an argument that no longer belonged to me. It didn't come. My parents didn't apologize. I didn't expect them to. Apologies require accountability, and accountability requires a version of themselves they'd never been willing to meet. What they did instead was retreat first into outrage, then into silence. The family grapevine told me they were taking space as if space had been their idea. I didn't correct anyone. I focused on my life. I learned the rhythms of my unit, the way days begin before the sun and end with a kind of exhaustion that feels earned. I learned how to trust people who corrected me without belittling me, who noticed effort without needing to control it. I learned that discipline, when it's fair, doesn't crush you, it builds you. I moved my belongings into a place that was mine, not impressive, not permanent, but honest. I hung nothing on the walls at first, just to feel the quiet. When I finally did, I chose one photo from the ceremony, not the moment my father spoke, but the moment before. Me in uniform, eyes forward, unbroken. Sometimes late at night, I thought about the child I used to be, the one who learned to disappear to survive. I wondered what she would have thought if she'd seen me then standing in front of a room full of people refusing to be reduced to a footnote. I think she would have been relieved. The last message I received from my family came months later. Not from my father, not from my mother, from my sister. It was short. I didn't think it would go this far. I stared at it for a long time before responding. It went exactly as far as it needed to, I wrote back. She didn't reply. And that was okay. I didn't win anything in the way people usually mean when they talk about revenge. I didn't take something from them. I didn't humiliate them back. I didn't rewrite the past or force an apology that would have rung hollow anyway. What I did was remove myself from a story that required me to be smaller for it to make sense. That's not revenge, that's self-respect. Years from now, people will remember that ceremony differently. Some will remember the uniforms, the flags, the pride of it. A few will remember the moment something went wrong and a family cracked in public. Most will forget the details entirely. But I won't. I'll remember standing there hearing the truth spoken out loud and realizing that truth doesn't always come to destroy you. Sometimes it comes to set a boundary so clear it finally lets you breathe. I'll remember choosing not to beg for a place I was never meant to earn. I'll remember choosing not to carry shame that didn't belong to me. Family, I learned, is not defined by blood or paperwork or the stories people tell when they think you won't interrupt. Family is defined by who respects your voice when you finally use it. And if you've ever been in a room where someone tried to erase you, if you've ever been told to be grateful for being tolerated, if you've ever stayed silent because speaking felt too expensive, I hope you hear this part clearly. You don't owe your quiet to anyone who benefits from it. You don't owe access to people who confuse control with care. And you don't have to burn the house down to walk out the door. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up, say one true sentence, and leave. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Where were you listening from when you heard it? Have you ever had a moment where staying silent felt easier, but speaking changed everything? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you want to keep following stories like this, stories about boundaries, dignity, and what happens when people stop accepting the roles they were given, subscribe and stay with us. We have many more stories to share, and we're just getting started.